Hi guys, welcome to the dynamic app configuration code film. We've looked at the storyline, we've looked at the database prep work that has been done to get us ready to connect to our database to test our options. Remember, we made mention of a number of options that can help us to work in the light of dynamic app configuration. Dynamic app configuration, we had some options as um, the inline execution file, and then we talked about, we made mention of script. Inline execution is what we're going to focus on now. For this code film, we're just going to look at how to write some code for just inline execution, whereby we do some setting on our database and we just find out what the transaction isolation level is. In the separate code film, we're going to actually test the database isolation levels that are available with MySQL in terms of serializable, repeatable read on committed, and read committed. So this code film is just about writing some code to buttress our inline execution view that we made mention of in our previous code films. That's in the storyline code film. So you can actually go back and watch the dynamic app configuration storyline code film if in case you don't understand anything in this code film. Alright, so let's just go straight into it and let's get our hands dirty. Alright, so first of all, we will launch Eclipse. So I have Eclipse on my text bar, so let's launch Eclipse and select our workspace. Okay, so we're going to create a new Java project. We're going to call, we click on File, navigate New, select Java project. Then we'll give it a project name. I'll give it a project name of Options. Yeah, Options. Then keep all the other defaults, then finish. Don't worry, you don't create this. It's not the concern of this code film. The models is not the concern. Okay, so we have our options here. Now we're going to create a new package. New package. And we're going to name that demo.startup.inline. We click on finish. And in this package, we're going to create our app class. So new, right click on package, new, then class. We'll give it name app. Then we select the public static void main and click on finish. Right, so it's in this class that we're going to write our code or inline execution. So we may want to just give a little bit of comments to let us know what we are doing. So say inline execution app, inline execution options demo. That will be our program. Okay, so what do we want to do? First of all, let's start our step-by-step procedure that we want to do. We want to be able to first of all connect to our database. When we're done connecting to our database, as we said, we just want to perform the inline execution of our dynamic app configuration. So we want to set our transaction isolation level, and the way we want the option, or the option we are looking at is the inline execution option. So inline execution option. So first of all, we connect to our database, set transaction isolation level. Then we are using the inline execution option. When we are done, we may want to, we've set it, so we want to return or get transaction isolation level that has been set on. The last one will be to close the connection. Alright, so even before setting, I did mention that we just want to see that we just want to prove that inline execution works. So I may counterplay within getting the transaction level and then setting the transaction isolation level, because I want to make you aware that you can set the isolation level by an inline way, and you can also read the isolation level here, but don't look at it as an inline way. Just in case I interplay between the two, I'll explain why I'm doing that, but this is the step-by-step procedure we want to go with. So how do we connect to our database? Because this is a Java code, this is Java code, and it has to speak, Java code has to speak to our MySQL DB. So how are we going to do that? Because the Java code has to speak to our MySQL DB, and the way we are going to do that is we have to have a driver or a connector. Java code is one, I wouldn't say entity, but that's one concern, and MySQL is a different concern. So there has to be a bridge. You have to have a bridge, the bridge to connect Java to MySQL, and that bridge is a connector, and that connector is what is a Java connector, the Java MySQL connector or driver. So that's the bridge that is going to help us to perform that connection. So now someone asks, how do I do that? The thing about writing code is that most of the time what you have is not what you are trying to do has been done already by someone, and what you want to do, there's a documentation for it that supports what you want to do. So most of the time you have to really look into the documentation or Google to find out what you want to do. That's one way of example, just to start what you have to do. Like I'll call them starter files options or template options, or just ways of doing basic stuff. Any other thing you want to do depend on your ingenuity or creativity. Maybe you want to connect to a database to do whatever gaming or whatever shop e-commerce website you want to build. That ingenuity is dependent on you. But something like how to connect to the MySQL DB connectors, that's not dependent on you. That's not dependent on the documentation per se. It's dependent on your creativity, what you want to do to bring out that unique idea or project that you have in mind. So that's where you have to spend some time combing through some documentation, and also if you've learned any form of programming, your skill sets will also be at play here. Yeah, so that was just by the way. So first let's create some methods for that. A method that connects to our database. That's one method. A method that disconnects from our database. Having functions and methods is a nice way of grouping all related code together. It improves your form of cohesion. Yeah, it's not your code is not left out in the wild. There's a form of grouping that relates to a particular method. Yeah, so we'll connect, disconnect, then we can set transaction ISO level, set transaction ISO level. That's one. Setting here is where we'll pass a string, so we'll pass a string for that. So we'll pass a string, and getting the get transaction ISO level is also another method. So we have like 4 methods that we'll be using. So yeah, as I said earlier, if the need arises, and I may call get transaction isolation level first to support a point, then later on and later set this to support our inline execution. So the inline execution comes by typing your isolation level you want to set inside this. So this is where the inline execution comes inside. Yeah, so let's create our methods first. So we have to connect to our database. That's the first thing. So we'll create the method, and Yeah, Eclipse can help you to create the method. There's no doubt about that. With Eclipse you can create the method, but with this method it's a static method, meaning it belongs to the class. You may not want it to be static. You may want it to be belong to an object rather. That's your own reason. One or two reasons you may want it to belong to the class. So let's make it belong to the class for now. So that let's make it belong to the class. Yeah, don't worry. Let's make it belong to the class. So we'll do the same for all of them. So before we connect to our database, we have to load the driver. Let's do away with this to do. Before, how do we connect to our database? You see, we need a connector. So we have to load the driver, or load driver. So how do we load the driver? Class.forName, and we pass the name of the driver we want to load. It will throw an exception just in case the driver is not found, and we'll handle that exception. So if we can't load the driver, then we'll say unable to load driver. That's the first thing. You have to load the driver. So we'll pass the driver here. We'll look at that just step by step. So first we load the driver. After loading the driver, what do we want to do? We want to connect to the database. So after loading, we have to have a connection to the database. So now connect. So how are we going to connect to our database? Is a MySQL is a MySQL is a database management system. It has a client side, it has a server side. So the client side is for you, the client, to perform your queries, to write whatever programming you have in mind just for database information. So the language you use is SQL for that. But MySQL server is a server that is going to house your databases and tables. So that one too has its own program that runs behind the scene for you to talk to the server. So whenever you type a query, you're actually speaking to the server. Right, what does this mean? Let's just go let's drift a little away from the Java and go into MySQL for some short explanation and tutorials. We run command prompt as administrator, then we'll navigate to wherever MySQL is being installed. So just cd, we are just trying to go back. We are going up the directory. So we want to locate the MySQL server and MySQL client, the server and the client, or the client and the server, to backtrace what we are trying to do here. The reason I'm explaining this is that when you try to connect to the server, that's when we are connecting to our server, we connect to the server by using a static method in a driver manager class called getConnection. And getConnection will need a URL, that's to the server, the username and the password. So the username, the URL is like something like www.imgoingtofacebook.com. Facebook.com is being housed or is being hosted on a server. You understand? There's a server that the code is running. So you have to speak to that server with a username and password. It's the same with MySQL too. When you're talking to when you want to speak to or you want to query your statements or query your database or tables, you have to have a username and a password, and you have to enter through via a URL, something of that sort. Yeah, that's how it has been designed. It seems all this have been designed around the login feature. So you always have to log into something to access some form of resource. So driver manager.getConnection is the static method you use to access or connect to your database, and it returns an object of type connection. Yeah, so just put this in mind for now. Now let's go to the MySQL and let's explain why some few differences. So what I want to do right now is that I want to launch the MySQL client first, but I have to locate the directory that MySQL client is found, and the directory for that, from you can actually search for it in your search. So MySQL command line client, you can actually open the file location for that, go back and try and locate it. That's okay. This is just for the client. Well, we want to run the actual program, so let's search in Windows program files, MySQL server, no, MySQL, then server, then bin. So bin has the MySQL client that we want. I want to exit. What we looked at, what we saw first was that of the command line for MySQL client. I wouldn't want to launch that. I want to launch the MySQL program via the command prompt, not its own standalone application. So this is a directory we want to move to. So we're going to copy the address as a text. You will cd to that, change directory to that. Then we're going to run the MySQL client first. So let's look at the client. And to access the client, as we said, it's like logging into Facebook. You have to pass it a username. For this, we'll use the root user, and we have to pass it a password. So we have to enter the password for the root user. Alright, so now we're inside the MySQL client. The reason, let's show all our databases and see if, let's show our databases. Okay, that means our server is running because the MySQL service is running in the background. When I say MySQL service is running in the background, what I mean is that when you click on this icon here, the MySQL notifier, you can see that it shows running. If I'm to stop this right now and try and execute another query, you realize that I'll lose connection. So lost connection to the MySQL server during query. So that's what we are going to do now. We are going to start the MySQL server. So as you can see, this is the client side and we have the server side. So now we are now trying to launch the server side via command prompt. So how do we do that? Alright, so just as we did for the MySQL client, we'll have another command prompt, open another command prompt, run as administrator, and we'll move up the directory to the root directory. Then we'll change our directory to the MySQL bin. Then we're going to execute MySQL D and we'll say console. And by just doing this, we've started the MySQL server. So right now, if I'm to query the MySQL, if I'm to write a query in the MySQL client, you realize that I won't lose connection this time around. Oh, access denied. Okay, I've lost connection, so let's restart the connection again. It just makes sense. MySQL root password. Wow, access denied. Let's take another alternative again. I'm amazed. We are having an access denied when this sounds running already. Okay, let me see. Our server is running, so let me start again. Let me run the command prompt as administrator once again. Navigate up the directory. Now navigate back to where we had MySQL client. We pass in the root user. We pass the password as well. Oh no, I'm not typing the right password. Is that what I'm doing now? Oh, sorry. Wow. I'm being hit with an error. I just don't understand how it's happening. Alright, let's do this again. Let's launch the client again. Okay, it says cannot connect to server on localhost. That's good because the server has been shut down. Now let's start the server again. Our server has started successfully. Now let's try again and log in. Access denied. Sorry, do I have this open somewhere else? Wow. Let's take another thing. Okay. It seems it's working now, but how do minus u root? Okay, it's working. I didn't pass in the password. Yeah, I think there's an explanation for that in the documentation about MySQL root and password. Don't worry, it's now working. So I'll probably have to investigate this data to find out why. Alright, so that shows that it's working now. So if we do show databases, now we can see our databases, but we logged in as root. So this is just a scanty. We're not seeing all the databases because we didn't pass in the password. So the password ties it to the actual root user, but this is just root access. So we are not actually getting a feel of what all the tables we would have seen as compared to using the password option, which I still don't understand why it's not working as of today when we just ran this a few minutes ago, and right now nothing seems to be working. I don't know why, but I'll have to investigate and find out why access has been denied. Let me use my other user that I have, some and password. Still not working. I'll have to investigate, but for the sake of explanation, you can see that this is the client side and this is the server side. We'll have to look into this to find out why. Probably is where I started the MySQL demo. I still don't know why. Alright. Yep, so that's just the explanation, by the way. So even if I'm to close this now and now I'm to restart the service, that's the MySQL server service. Let's give this spin and log in. This one is working. This one is really working. I think there's the way I started the MySQL server over there. That has to be the reason. There has to be a reason for that, because I have to investigate and find out why running with console and there's not giving me the option. So if I'm to show databases now, I'm supposed to see all the databases. Yeah. Alright, so that's just for you to understand why we have to pass in a username and a password. The bloopers, sorry that I had some bloopers here and there. Alright, so you need to pass a URL, a username, and a password. Okay, so we're going to create fields for those to store those values. So we'll not create a local variable, but we're going to create a field. The difference, the local variable restricts it only to the class defines, the method defines itself, but field sends it or encapsulates it to the class. So we have our URL, private string URL, private string user, private string password. So for our URL, just as we have something equals to Facebook, www.facebook.com, this is going to be jdbc mysql localhost, that's the name of the server, and the database you want to access. So this is where we type the database you want to access. We'll look at that later. And then the user we want to access, we want to use, or we want to grant permission to access this database is a social security staff user. And we've already created those users as we saw in the prep work, the database prep work CodeFilm. So we're just going to show all the users. So select user from mysql.user. So the first, we have social staff John, that's one user. We'll paste it here. And the password for social staff John, remember when we did our previous film, it says my password social then John. And in the database we created, if we are to look carefully into all the databases, show databases, this is root users. So for root users we can actually see all the databases that have been created. We see the social security numbers database, so we copy that and we paste it here. So that's the database we want to access. So get connection, we've passed the URL, the username, and the password. It throws an exception just in case it cannot connect to the database. So we'll handle the exception. We won't throw it out of the method, but we'll surround with a try catch. If all this is successful, we want to have a prompt saying successful connection. But if this is not successful, we want to say sys out unsuccessful connection. Or better still, for the sake of the kind of error message you want to throw more light on, you may want to actually find out what the actual exception that is being generated, the message that you get. So that one too helps. So you can actually concatenate your message saying unsuccessful connection, plus whatever message that you want to get from the SQL exception thrown. So that's by the way. So we have to load our driver. We haven't yet loaded our driver. We have to connect. So when we connect to our database, it returns a connection object. So connection. So we have to save that object that it's returning with. The object we'll get is going to be of type connection. So we're going to save it in con. So con to create it as a field con private connection, and we'll save it as null. Yeah, so with this con we can actually know the type of database that it has had access to. So we can do con dot get metadata, and that gets you the database we've connected. Successful connection to database, then it will print out the database we've successfully connected to. So successful connection to the database name, and to print out that database name. So it returns a database metadata. So we can have .toString here. It should come as a, if it comes out toString, it will come as an object. Okay, for now, let's leave it as it is. If it comes as an any other thing, we can cast it to the right method. So basically, we are almost through with the connecting to our database. So we load the driver, we connect, pass in the URL, the username and password. If there's a successful connection, there will be a prompt. If it's unsuccessful, there will be an exception that is thrown. Now load the driver. So now is how do we load the driver? All right, so you have to go online and search for the driver that helps you to connect Java to MySQL. But I've already downloaded the driver already. But if it were to be you for the first time, what you would have done would have been to go to launch Google, then you launch Google, then you type connector or connect Java to MySQL. Then it gives you some tutorials how to connect Java to MySQL. So this from the MySQL documentation itself. So it shows you how to do that. It makes mention of a driver you need when you are using JDBC as an application server. The driver manager class manages the establishment of connection. The easiest way to do this is to use a class that forms you on that class that implements the driver interface with the MySQL connector or GJ. The name of the class is com. So you have to spend some time in the documentation to find out how you're going to connect to the MySQL database. Yeah, so now what you do is you need to download the driver. That's the driver you have to download the driver. If you don't have the driver, you can't connect it. And this is how where JDBC comes inside. So JDBC is a Java database connectivity API that helps you to connect to the database. So you can read more about JDBC if you have spare time or some free time on your hands. So this is how to connect it, and it gives you a whole lot of messages and stuff. So first thing that you want to download the driver, because it makes mention of a driver, and then you can actually click this to see connection installation, how to install the connector G, how the format comes inside, and you have to spend some time. So you download to navigate you, so you start downloading the connector for your system. This if you're a new user, but I've downloaded this already, so I have it already in my downloads. So I'm just going to import it or bring it from wherever it is on my directory or my system to our project folder. So I'll expand this package explorer, and I'll right click on options. I'll navigate to build path, configure build path, click on modular path, add external jars, click on add external jars, then select the jar file. This is a jar file, and that jar file is the connector we've downloaded for Java. Click on open, click apply and close, and you realize that it comes as a reference library, and this is the driver that has the classes. The jar is a connector API that helps you to connect to the database. So as they said, you need the class you are looking for to be able to perform that connection to the driver is the com.mysql JDBC driver. So we are going to look for com.mysql.jdbc.driver. That's the class that we have to pass inside the class for name method. So it seems this one here, the thing that with this driver, the package has been renamed to suit com.mysql.cj.jdbc. So it's not the package has just been renamed. If we do go with what we have already, com.mysql.jdbc.driver, will be made aware of it being deprecated, that this has been deprecated and the package has been has been renamed or has been worked on or refactored on. So you have to use the new driver. So let's just now connect for the sake of, to prevent the avoidance of doubt. Sometimes you can copy code. If it's not working, they've also written a code that helps you to know that there's a newer um, class or API that exists. So connect Java. So because it's not a static method, but it's being tied to, it's now going to be tied to an object. We have to create an object to be able to access the connect method. So we'll create an app. App is the class, so we're going to create an app, and the app we're creating is the inline options app. And it's going to create a new app. Yep, and we'll tie or bind the app we've created to call this connection. Alright, so if we do that, we'll have to do the same for this connection as well. Alright, so disconnect, and when we are disconnecting, let's create a method for disconnect. Create method disconnect. Let's move it down below connection. And so we are going to disconnect. We've opened a connection. So if you've opened a connection, you have to close the connection. Yep. So that's what we are going to do. We just close the connection. If we can't close the connection, let's know why we can't close the connection. So unsuccessful. We can just print out the message for this e.get message. So we know the message that will be generated. Alright, so I think we are okay to test connection to the database and this connection to the database. So let's run this code. Alright, so remember, it does tell you that this is deprecated and there's a new Java class for that. So it tells that connection to database was successful, and because we are using metadata, that's why all this is coming. But we can handle this, that it doesn't print us all this metadata stuff. But successful connection to database, we want the database name, so we're going to do that. But you can see that now we're connected to our database. But it makes mention of this deprecated driver class, so we have to now use this class. So you can actually copy this and just paste it there. That's one way. Or you can actually go and locate it inside your driver connector class, the Java file you downloaded. You can actually find that class. So it's com.mysql.cj.jdbc. You click on this package, you move to driver. This is the class. You right click, copy the qualified name, then you paste it here. And you don't need a class, you just need driver. So that's one way of doing this. Right, now let's handle the con.metadata. So con.getMetadata. Okay, so let me save this as a string. I want to do something. So just say m is equal to this. So we'll change the type to database m. Alright, then we'll come here. We want to know the database we are connected to. I hope I'm using the right method. So m dot get catalog term. Yeah, I think this is the get catalog term. So this returns the database we are connected to. It's a string. You can find this from the documentation. Yeah, this exists in the documentation. So let's connect again. So successful connection to database. It says database. All right, please. No, there's not the right. There's you can actually let's go and spend some time in the documentation to know the actual database name. So let's check our connection API, connection Java API. Let's see how we find out the name of the database. Let's see, get catalog. Retrieves this connections object's current catalog name. Okay, let's try that one and see. Let's do get catalog. It comes as a string. I think did we just do that? Let's try. Let's query again. We want the database name. So let's search. It has to be somewhere. Data. Or let's do get schema. Let's try retrieve this object's current schema name. Okay, schema and database are quite related. Schema name. So let's do get schema rather. Let's see the schema we are inside. So we do con.get schema. Yeah, this should give us the database name. Schema is a structure before you create your database. Wow, it's no. If you also don't want to comb through the documentation, you can feel free to just Google how to get database name. But the more you Google, database table, I think it's get metadata. It has to be get metadata. So get metadata. That one has to work. So con.get metadata dot, and has any other. So if we get the metadata, what else do we do? Let's go deeper. Get metadata. It will return an object of type metadata, database metadata. So let's go into that documentation and see what we can also fetch out from that. And wow, it's not coming out well, but you may have to try one or two of them. Database product name, choose the name of this database product. We want to know the database we're connected to. Retrieves the connection that produces this metadata connection. Get catalog term, retrieve the database vendor term for the catalog. Oh. I'm right now I'm in a fix because I'm trying to prove a point, but it's not prove a point, but bring out a certain explanation. But it seems the tables and the username, we just need something to prove that we're connected to this database. And then I guess the schema and get catalog, those that were the most suitable ways of doing that. I've actually tried using that before. That's why I was very confident with. using that, but it seems I don't know what happened today. We try to get catalog table, but let's see. Let's just dig deeper and see. It's still giving us something that we don't like. Let's do get schema and see. Something has to come out. There has to be. We have to spend time on the documentation to find out that, but I'm being a little bit honestly lazy now to go through all that. So get metadata, then let's see toString on that. So it's bringing out a lot of gibberish values. So I'm not trying to get catalog separator. It seems now we're doing code code and fix. But we've been able to connect to the database as long as we are able to have that successful connection to the database prompt, meaning that we've been able to connect to our database. Just that the extra flavor that we needed to prove that we can connect to the database is not what we're actually getting. So let's do get URL. Let's see, get URL. If we're able to connect, let's see the database URL produces. So that's the JDBC my social security numbers URL. Fine. Okay, that's not bad. We can actually see that we're connected to this URL. Let's see what other things we can get from that. We can actually get the URL, get the username. We can get the URL, we can get the username. I think yeah, can actually get the connection to as well. Yeah, so at least it proves the point. Like yeah, we are connected to it. Successful connection to the database. You can find whatever that you want to in this documentation. Yep, whatever that you want to return back. But it would have been nicer if we had the database name, which I've seen before, but I don't know why. For today of all days, I still can't find the database name. If it doesn't work, I'll just leave it and move on. Coming as an object, I don't want it to be an object. We have to cast. So successful connection to our database. Alright, that will be for it. Okay, so we are successfully connected to our database. And now we can disconnect. Now our main focus will be on how do we set our transaction isolation level. So it's dynamic app configuration. Okay, so before that, this is what we're going to do. We first want to know let's check. We will first of all check the transaction isolation level. Get transaction ISO level. Let's create those methods. Get and set. One of them will just be a return, so I wouldn't want to pass a string to that one. So we have our methods here, set, get, and set. Alright, so let's copy this to the end of the somewhere at the end. Okay. So inline set transaction ISO level, then we get our transaction ISO level. Alright, so this is what we're going to do. We're now going to, first of all, someone may ask what are transaction isolation levels and what are isolation levels, what are the isolation levels that are available. Alright, so by default, let's now launch MySQL. You can work with the client, so don't worry, let's work with the client. Or it will be too cryptic. I don't want anything to sound like it's rocket science, so let's actually launch the MySQL workbench. I'll close this. Let's close the command prompt. Right, now let's launch this connection, the root user. Let's launch the root user. MySQL. Let's type the password. Alright, so by default, MySQL, the transaction isolation level by default is repeatable read. So if you query that, you will get repeatable read. Fine. What are the other available isolation levels? And we have serializable. Let's minimize this. Let's have some white space. We have serializable. We have repeatable read. We have read uncommitted. And we have read committed. By default, MySQL's transaction isolation level is repeatable read. That's by default. So that's why when we query this by default, it's repeatable read. But when you start a transaction, you are going to override any other isolation level that has been set, because when there's no transaction, it counts the whole query or SQL query as one transaction. But when you execute the start transaction query, then you are starting your own user-defined transaction. Yeah, so by default it's repeatable read. By default, just as you are seeing here, by default, even if I log into a different user, let's go into the sum user and type his password, you realize that by default is also what? Repeatable read. That's by default. Alright, so that's what we're going to do here. So I know I said set transaction ISO level, but I said we want to first of all query the isolation level just to see something, then later we'll set it. Then when we set it, the other CodeFilm will do the actual database isolation level test with the social security numbers. So for the sake of proving that we've connected to our database, or not proving, but explaining that we've connected to our database and we can get our transaction isolation level by querying from Java, that's what we're going to do, so that we understand the meaning of the inline execution. So first of all, let's type the query here: select at session dot transaction isolation. That's the query. That's the query we've typed here. Let's come into our code and let's dig our hands into writing the actual implementation. Alright, so just some prep work here. So we've passed the string, and the string is going to query, is going to return, is going to perform a query. And from what we've realized, when a query is performed, we get a result. That's a results grid, meaning that for each time you execute a SQL statement, there's going to be a result. So we have to have a way of saving these results. So before that, how do we even go about querying into MySQL database? And you know that we have to have a connection. So we have to have a connection to the database. That's the first thing. Without the database connection, we can't create statements. So that's why when we are even logging into the workbench, we had to have a connection first, then a statement. So a connection, then a statement. So you had a connection, then we saw a statement. We saw executed a query, a statement. So likewise here too, we have to have a connection, and we do have a connection, which is con. And with con, we can create a statement. You get it? And statement returns an object of type statement. So we have statement stmt, and this statement stmt is going to return an object of type statement. Let's import this. You can actually use Ctrl+Shift+O to do that and import that package. You select the first one, that's the java.sql statement, click finish. So con.statement, so this is what we're going to use to create our statement. So create statement returns a statement object, and that object we have is what we are going to use to execute our query. Hope it makes sense now. Yeah, so when we have our statement, we have a connection to the database, we create statement, and then the statement helps us to query. So even with querying, it's not all queries that will give us a result set. Some of them set, some of them don't give a result set. So for this one, we are trying to select all the transaction isolation levels. We know we said set transaction isolation level, but I want to help you to understand to be able to read from the database first, the isolation level that's available for that database from this user's connection. I hope it all makes sense. So statement.execute. So we'll execute the query. So the execute query. And the query we are going to execute is going to be the string, or you can actually pass it as SQL statement. You say SQL. Alright, let's sound the try catch. Let's put all into the same try catch block. Let's just clean our code. Clean code. Let's delete this. Alright, so we're going to execute our query now. So statement.execute query. Now when we are done, the query is going to perform a query, but to return a result set, as we've seen in the query. When we query our statement here as well, we do get some result set, which is printable read, and it comes as a result grid. So we are going to save our statement also in a result set. So result set rs is going to be equal to this. Let's import this as well. Ctrl+Shift+O, and to import the MySQL, the one from SQL. Yeah, if you use Ctrl+Shift+O, you are confident of what you are doing. Alright, so this is what we do now. And now we will get transaction isolation level. What we do is that we want to retrieve the results set from SQL query. Alright, so how do we retrieve that? You see, it comes as a column and a row and a column. So if it was a different query, probably you have more tables, more rows and more columns. So whenever you want to look through the result set, you have to iterate through the result set. So you have to iterate, and the syntax for that, the code for that is rs.next. And as you are iterating, you want to get the columns, so, or the name of the row. If you know the name of the column, you can retrieve the name of the column, but for the sake of this execution, you want to retrieve only the first column. So you do rs.getString. Don't worry, I'll explain why we are not seeing anything now. You see, the scope of rs is that of where's this? It's a method. It's in a method scope, which is a block scope. It's in a block scope. So to reset our result set to belong to the class, we may not be able to access the result set variable. So this is what we have to do now, and then private, and this, that applies to the statement as well. So once that is done, you see now we can access result sets here, and the rs here, the rs variable or the data member here, and we can also get the string here. So now we can do away with this. Yep, that's good. And the statement as well too, statement is in a block scope. So if this executes and rs is saved, and we query our statement, we don't want a case whereby when we come here, rs will try an exception that there is null. That can happen. That can happen. So you may want to make statement belong to the class as well. That's one way. Let's just do that for the sake of having everything on as one. No. Okay. So now we know that statement is here, result set is here. So if we come here now and say rs.next, we are iterating through the result set, and next is what you use to do that. And rs.getString is what you are going to use to retrieve any column that you know. If you knew a column, you type the column in this. But since we have no idea of any column, but we know it's just a single column, we will pass the getString int and type 1. And let's undo the exception that has been thrown. So surround with try catch. Okay, so this is going to return a string. So it's going to be a string, and the string is going to give us the isolation level. So we want to set iso. This is get. When we get something, return a value. So we'll return a string, and the string is going to be the iso level string. So we'll create a string object here, an object of type iso level, and we're going to set iso level to this. So yeah, sorry, we made this void, so it has to be a string. Yeah, string. So we return the iso level now to. Alright, so this is nice. So now we return iso level from database. So that's what we are doing now. We retrieve our results from SQL query by iterating through the result set, get the ISO level, then we return it. So when we come here now and say get transaction ISO level, it's going to bring out, it's going to return a string. So we're going to handle that by just doing is is equal to null. Then later we set is to this. Then we'll just spit out the database transaction isolation level per this user. It can be per this user or session is going to be is. Alright, so this is what we're going to do now. Okay, so if everything is fine, then we can execute our code and see what we'll get. Remember that by default is what? Repeatable read. So this is just to explain that we can get a transaction isolation level from our database. We haven't yet gone into what we say setting the transaction isolation level. Remember, this just a query. We want to know that we have access to the database transaction level, so I can print on our console. So let's run this code. So good. So successful connection to database. Database transaction isolation level per this user or session is what? Repeatable read. And we said by default is what? Repeatable what? Read. So voila, our code is working perfectly. There's nothing wrong with our code. Alright, so now let's get deeper into inline execution option. We said this is our main focus for our CodeFilm. So we just want to say that when we say we are doing an inline execution for a dynamic app configuration, we are actually typing it here. You get inside the source code. So anytime I want to change the transaction isolation level, if I minimize this and I come back, I always have to open my code and come and type whatever isolation level I want to set. So let's set the transaction isolation level to one of the isolation levels we made mention of today. We said that we have numerous isolation levels: serializable, repeatable, read uncommitted, read committed. So let's set. So how do we set the transaction isolation level? There's a query for that, and that's the set session transaction isolation level and the isolation level you want. If you don't, because you've done some work with it, so you know it. If you have no idea, you just have to Google, come to the documentation, MySQL transaction isolation levels, and then yeah, it will lead you to the documentation as always. Then with the documentation, you spend some time and go through to see how you set your transaction isolation level. Yeah, so transaction isolation level. So you may want to see how do you set it. So you just have to spend some time. You just have to spend some time here. Just spend some few time reading through the documentation to see how that is done. Yeah, honestly, that's one of the ways that you can use to learn a lot in this documentation. So how do you set the transaction isolation level? Just look through the documentation. If you see a sample code, you can go ahead and try it. If you don't see any sample code, you still Google, like keep Googling. You may be led to other links or pages. Set global transaction, so it gives you this syntax, and then the statement you have to type. So it gives you an example. Good. So set transaction isolation level serializable. This is how you do it. So you just copy and paste and try. So yeah, that's how it is. So set transaction isolation level. So you can set for a session. Is that the only way you have? So this is set transaction isolation level. Without any session or global keyword, the statement applies to the next single transaction performed within the session. So subsequent transaction referred using the session value of the name characteristics. The statement is not permitted within transactions. So there's a reason. If you want to, with session keyword, the statement applies to all subsequent transactions performed within the current session. But without any, the statement applies only to the next single transaction performed within the session. So these are things you may want to spend some time in the documentation to understand. Yeah, so let's set our transaction isolation level session, because we are using a session because the statement applies to all subsequent transactions performed within the current session, because we may mention that we want to test social security numbers in the light of database isolation level. So that's where we are going with session. So you can actually copy and paste this here, but it's not the best for me because we want to type and see why we call this inline execution. So set session transaction isolation level. Is it isolation level to, let's change it to serializable. Okay, so now this time around, let's come to our query. So execute our query result set it will give us a result set as usual. But this one is we are going to execute. When we execute this, every is the sequence thing gives you a result set, fine. But this one, when you execute it for, just look here. If when you execute this query, it doesn't return anything. It just sets it for you like it has been set. So you won't have any result set. So this code will have to change. Remember, we said that we selecting the session transaction isolation level was to just test that by default we can read the isolation level on the data available on the database social security numbers, and we say by default it's repeatable read for all databases, fine. But per our CodeFilm of inline execution, we want to set the transaction isolation level. We can't use execute query because execute query returns what? A result a result set, and we don't want that. We want to execute something and move on. So we may want to change the method you are using. You see, for this statement, I want to just execute a query, and you type your query here. So SQL query, and this returns a boolean value. So you can save that boolean value. Just boolean, and you say not done. So if it's not done, say not done is equal to this. Yeah, it returns a sequence. It returns true or false, and the true or false it returns has regards to if there will be a result set or no result set. Per this query, there will be no result set, so you just say no result set. How do I know? I'll pull it up in the documentation for you. No result set. So if there is no result set, it's going to return as false. So if there's no result set, false, then here there was no result set. If there's a result set, it returns as what? True. So we didn't want to use this anymore because we are not going to query. As I said, we are not going to query. We are not going to execute a query here. We want to execute. We want to set our database. So yeah. And someone asked, what happens to this query now? For this query, probably I'll have to create another method. Let's do this now. Let's just do a simple refactoring. Let's call this set transaction isolation level, and let's call this, and this one too is get transaction isolation level. This one gets the transaction isolation level for you, but before you have to perform a query. And let's add one more method, another method, create method. I'll just call this one private void select transaction ISO level, and this one to pass in a string is equal. Yeah, and to bear the similar features to this one as well, same code, and we wouldn't have this. So select transaction isolation level. Why is it trying to remove the method? So connect, disconnect, select transaction isolation level. This one is going to be set. This one is just going to set the transaction isolation level. If there's a value to give you a boolean result. So that's how we know that it has been done. Yeah. Why is it giving me this? So when we come here now, and let's add a select now here. So for select transaction ISO level. So we'll call the method inline options app dot select transaction isolation level, and what we'll pass is a query select at session dot transaction dot isolation, right? is what we're going to use to select our transaction isolation level. Because we said that we just want to what? Execute. If we want to just execute, we have to just execute, and there was no result set being returned. It's going to be a boolean value. So for even our boolean no result, we may want to make it belong to the class, so we know that these data members refer to. So these are all SQL members, and then we make it null. And no, let's make it. There's no result set, false. Yeah, let's leave it. I think by default it's going to set to true. So yeah, so you just leave it. So the SQL members. So we type there's no SQL, no result set here. So this is how we know it's done. Remember, if there's a result set, it's going to be true. But if there's no result set, it's going to be what? False. So now when we are done, when we say select transaction isolation level, we've saved our no result set here. That's we've saved the value, and we come and print it out here. So we've set it now. We've done our set, but setting doesn't give us a return, so we may have to select first, because once we set, we can't see because of the result set that we've done. So we'll refactor this a little bit now and make this one rather 4 and this one rather 3. And the reason is that in get transaction isolation level, we have to iterate via a result set. But if we haven't done the get, if we haven't set it, how do we get? You understand? And if we don't select to, how do you find? Yeah, that's the reason. Yeah, so as compared to what we had first, that was a lame way. We just wanted to prove that we could get something from our database, but this is now actual code. So yeah, so select transaction isolation level. It's going to select for you. If it selects, then you can get the transaction isolation level. This one will set for you. If it's set, it's returning, you have a boolean value, so we want to know was it successful. So how do we know? We'll do a sysout, say that, and we'll say we return the value. So we'll say session isolation level set, and there are no results. Remember, we had this boolean value, no result set. Yeah, because we're in a main method, we have to make it static. Honestly, I wouldn't want to put this code here. It spoils the code, so I can just leave that one inside execution, just here, just type it here, and let's have it here. So if it's true, so query executed, query or statement is executed, and we'll make a no result set. Remember, if there is no query, to return as what? True. So we'll make it what? False. So if there's a query, if there's a result set, true. But if there's no result set, yes, no result set, true. Statement has been executed. Let's go into the documentation to finally appreciate this. So let's go to STM, let's do execute Java SQL. We open the statement, click on the statement, and let's go into execute. So we have execute here. See, execute the SQL statement, which may return multiple results. So let's read more about this. Execute the given SQL statement which may return multiple results. In some uncommon situation, a single SQL statement may return multiple results or update count. Normally, you can ignore this unless you are executing a stock procedure that you know may return multiple results, or you are dynamically executing an unknown SQL string. So the execute method will do what it has to do. It says that true if the first result set if the first result is a result set with object. False if there's an update count or there is no result. So there is no result, so no result is going to come as what? False. That's why we are seeing that no result, then fine, it's true that there was no what? Result. Because no result will come as what? False. So statement executed, true. Yeah. Okay, so let's run our code and see what we are going to get. So we are changing the transactional isolation level, and this is what we call by the inline execution. Inline execution. When we do change it, we realize that it changes as well. So select transaction isolation level. Yeah, basically that's it. And you know why we are using result set for this, because it's going to give you a result set per the query we executed on the MySQL workbench. I just want to format this a little. It's looking a little bit some way, so format. Alright, let's execute our code, run our code, right click, then you select run as Java application, and let's see the results we have here. So you see successful connection to our database transaction isolation level per this user is what? Serializable. So it's working. So we've been able to change it. But what of our little diagnostic tool we implemented here? It seems this one is not working. Set transaction isolation level. It's supposed to print out. It's why didn't we see it? Why is she not showing? I'm calling her she. Let's run this again. Yeah, so she's showing. So statement executed what? True. Database transaction isolation level per this user or session is serializable. So this is the inline execution. Now let's do this. We'll save our project. I'm going to close my app. Now start it again. So we are seeing that it's tightly coupled to the app. Let's pick our PowerPoint now. It's tightly coupled. For each configuration change, the app must be visited. So now I have a case whereby, because I'm looking at social security numbers, I want to work in a database isolation level. I said later I'll explain the various isolation levels to you. And I don't want it to be serializable, but I want to be read uncommitted, because as and when a different user is making changes to the social security numbers, I want to be able to see those changes reflect in real time. So serializable is of a higher isolation level to me, and it's only concentrated on a single session making changes without any other body seeing what's going on. So now I've come. This is the project manager coming towards you. Samuel, we don't want this now. This is what we want because of the cases we're having internally, or the cases we're having from customers, so sorry, from our pensioners. Someone comes and he always has to start Eclipse to get that job done. You understand? You always have to launch the app and get that job done. It's too tight. It's tightly coupled to the app. It's not the best. So if I can't access the source code, I can't make those changes. That's what we're experiencing. That for each changes now, I have to come to the app and now see the project manager tells you that no more serializable. Someone make it read uncommitted. Let me confirm that read uncommitted, the isolation level. It's quite, programming is very interesting. So read uncommitted. Now I'm being too lazy. I'm searching within. It's no good. This tutorial read uncommitted. The documentation. Okay, yeah. So I'm typing the right thing. So read uncommitted. And remember, we said the default isolation level for InnoDB is repeatable read. InnoDB is a database engine by default. When we do show engines, you understand. So we've changed it now, and I have to visit my source code again and run my code again. Remind me later, and I'll set it to what? Read what? Uncommitted. So that way it's tightly coupled to what? The app. So this is the meaning of inline what? Execution. Someone we don't like read uncommitted. I've closed for the day. I've closed my app. I've closed my project. So I'm going home. Someone we don't like read uncommitted. Every day you have to come and open the source code and cause those changes to occur. You understand what I'm saying? It's not the best. It's tightly coupled. We don't want this. We want something else. And that something else is what? A file. And I'm saying file gives you the best form of separation of concerns, because you just type in the file and the file does the work for you. Alright, so now we don't want read uncommitted, we want read committed. You can reset it again. You execute your program. You have to build the application. And remind me later. Now it has set what? Read committed. Get it? So that's it for this CodeFilm. Wow, it has been interesting. So the next one will be for file. We just write some code for file as well within the same area of understanding. Then script, I said, is way advanced. That will be my assignment. And later on, we'll start testing a different isolation level per the SNIT numbers. It says dynamic app configuration. We're looking at SNIT numbers and how database isolation levels affect all this. It's quite broad, but I've encapsulated into a single CodeFilm. Yeah. So thanks so much for sticking with me, and I hope you enjoyed this CodeFilm. Sorry if I was moving too fast. I'll try my best to slow down next time. But I do enjoy what I'm doing, that's why. Alright, thank you so much, guys. Like the video, share, let your people know that there's something exists for database isolation level, and there's a practical, real life scenario attached to this. Thanks. See you in the next video.